Thank you for joining me in today's study. We're going to go on with with our next lesson here on this part two of our spiritual warfare series. This is based upon notes that I had together, getting ready to write a second book on spiritual warfare, which we're now pulling out of the mothballs and getting ready to do. And I'm just going to jump into it this morning because there's a lot of material I want to cover, and in covering it, I want you to understand that these concepts I'm bringing forth are ones that are reinforced starting off with in my book, Preparing to Make War. And if you don't have a copy of it, you need to get a copy of it. It's $10 plus $5 shipping. Send your request to Rick Tallent, P.O. Box 223, Lafayette, Georgia, 30728, and we'll get it right out to you. This second book will be a sequel to Preparing to Make War, and it's initially entitled Winning the War. Now, when we get into this, we have to understand a little bit more about the military science. So, to back up a little bit, I want to explain why military science is important. Military science serves to identify the strategic, the political, the economic, the psychological, the sociological, the operational, and the technical and tactical elements necessary to sustain the relative advantage of military force. In other words, how do you win? What does it take to win? If we're going to be winners, we're going to have to understand how winners act, what winners know, and how they react to those things that happen. Most people in their life, they go from one reaction to another reaction, from one crisis to another crisis, never establishing a means of avoiding those crises. And the reason why is because they're negotiating life. They're making deals every day in their life rather than taking control of their life. And see, that's the difference between negotiations and victory. Negotiations are diplomacy. Victory only comes from the surrender of the enemy. And the enemy is only going to surrender when he recognizes and knows that he has no ability to overcome the force that you have available to throw against him. And that you will use it. You will use that force. I laugh every time I see the little picture on Facebook. It says, it shows a mustard seed on a person's finger. He says, I have my mustard seed and I'm not afraid to use it. With faith of the grain of mustard seed, we can become victorious. But if through military science, we identify things. And once we've identified them, then we can understand them. And once we understand them, then we can take actions as are necessary to overcome those situations. Now, what's the role of military science in our daily lives? The importance of having a strong armed force and the need to protect people against the various threats is a constant feature of our lives. Now, many Christians say, well, God's got his angels camped around about. Yeah. So you're going to go out there unarmed because you're going to depend on the angels to do all the work. That's not scriptural. When we understand and when we know with the knowledge of military security, of how armed forces are organized to fight a war, and what is the art of war, when we can answer those questions, we are understanding things from position of military studies or military science. Now, if military science is indeed a true science, then its laws are immutable laws of the universe. And as such, they become the laws of God, and they operate in the spiritual realm as well as the natural realm. Now, when we get into this, that's when we get into understanding that the power of God operates through situations, and the power of God operates to control and manipulate situations. Okay? We have a lot of lessons that are yet to be learned because we're not graduate students. We don't have diplomas hanging all over the wall saying, I have completed my experience, my knowledge and experience. I know it all. No, we will not know it all. We will never know it all. We will never know enough. It's just like soldiers have to be constantly training. Soldiers have to be constantly learning more. And soldiers that refuse to go through additional training and refuse to go through more schooling and education to become a better soldier, you know what happens to them? They're relieved of duty. When it comes time for them to re-enlist, they may go in and start to re-enlist, and the command says, we've reviewed your military record and we've decided that we don't need you anymore. So don't bother trying to re-enlist. Why did that happen? It happened because that person did not take advantage of the opportunities to become a better soldier. Now, for those of us who are Christians, we understand that the hand of God is going to be on us. But we also need to understand that to be effective in reaching people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is what our mission is, we have to constantly be on the guard against the enemy. And we have to constantly be reviewing the tactics that we use to reach people. We have a lot of lessons yet to be learned. For someone to think that they're without interest in a matter of war is to think that unyielding and disagreeing societies can live in harmony. And we know that to be a lie. It is disillusionment in the most dangerous of ways. Yet many people are disillusioned. They become despondent because of it. And they fall away because they think they can't accomplish what needs to be done. But I'm here to tell you, if you'll study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, you will fight the good fight of faith. And you'll fight it with a tenacity that causes the enemy to want to run from you. Not run at you. Ever since the Garden of Eden, man has had a problem with obedience. He's had a problem with submission to authority, and he's had a problem with following instructions. There's no better example of this than the wars that have been fought to destroy mankind over the centuries. Each has been a repeat of the previous with its own signature added for distinction. Every war has essentially the same reason for starting and the same reason for ending. Either an end was negotiated or the end was negotiated by force. So it was either negotiated by diplomacy or it was negotiated by force. Look at Vietnam, look at Korea. Those were negotiated by diplomacy. Look at Japan. World War II was negotiated by force. We gave them no option but to surrender. All of these have been bloody conflicts that have cost lives, liberties, the pursuit of happiness, and economies, destroyed economies. Look what's happening in the Ukraine here in 2022, 2023. Russia has invaded the Ukraine. Literally Russia has gone in and tried to destroy homes and businesses and industry, destroy all of the infrastructure that they possibly can in an effort to destroy the people. But the people continue to fight for their freedom. Why? Because they've lived under that oppression before and they refuse to surrender. They will fight to the death. But along the way, it will cost Russia heavily in military losses, in economic losses, and in their political arena, it will cost them heavily. Regardless of the price paid in the previous war, there's another one will always follow. It doesn't matter how expensive it was. It doesn't matter how many lives were lost. There will be someone out there, some crazy person out there, some despot who will think that war is the way of becoming the most powerful person in the world. When the most powerful person in the world became a servant and gained more power than they will ever know, than they will ever experience. Understanding is not the same as accomplishing. There's a lot of people that go to school and they attend schooling and they get educated in how to do something. And then when they get into the real world out there, they discover that textbook theory and real world are many times diametrically opposites, diametrically opposed. You can study all you want in engineering in a classroom, but until you get out there in the field and start building stuff, designing and building stuff, and dealing with the real world problems and issues, you're not educated yet. In this volume, the same distinct perspective will be taken that we took in our first volume in Preparing to Make War. And we'll look at how wars are won and how they're lost. But more specifically, at how we can overcome without being overwhelmed. Many people get overwhelmed by the battle and they just give up, walk away. That's not an option for a soldier. So a soldier has to overcome in order to avoid being overwhelmed. In James, the Bible speaks emphatically to us and to our knowledge of good and evil in chapter 4, verse 17. Here's what it says. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So if we know what to do and we don't do it, that is sin. But if we don't know what to do and we're trying to do stuff, I believe I can say truthfully that that's also sin. It's a sin against us. Not just a sin against God, but it's a sin against us. Oh, because we need to be workmen that do not need to be ashamed of our knowledge of what to do. There's a big difference between knowing and doing. A difference that speaks of eternity in heaven or eternity in hell. To understand the principles of salvation, but to never apply them, is a mortal sin that will cost you your eternal soul. To understand the principles of spiritual warfare, but not apply them to one's life, is accepting defeat without a battle. And folks, that's as simple as I can get it. A lot of people get all excited about spiritual warfare. Ooh, I'm in spiritual warfare today. No, you're not. You're going through a typical day. Spiritual warfare is not some spiritual voodoo that you work up. It is a process of living and a way of life. A soldier is not a part-time soldier. A soldier is a full-time soldier. And even a person who's a member of the reserves or the National Guard, did you know that the government can call them up, the commander-in-chief can call them up to full-time military service at any time? And many who are retired face the same thing. Retired military face the same thing. They can be recalled to active duty at any time. Why? Because they are still soldiers. I was with a friend of mine one time, the guy that I was working with up in New Jersey by the name of Ray Yannick. And Ray had served in Vietnam in the United States Marine Corps. We were sitting in his office talking one day, and I said, "Oh, so you're an ex-Marine." And this big old man, 6 foot plus several inches, and 275, 300 pounds of just solid muscle, stood up from behind his desk, leaned over the desk, planted both hands in the desk, looked at me from under his eyebrows, and he said, "There ain't no such thing as an ex-Marine." I have never made that mistake again. Trust me, because what I saw in that man's eyes was something that I cannot explain. But I'll explain it by saying there ain't no such thing as an ex-Marine. And folks, there ain't no such thing as an ex-soldier of the cross. You're either a soldier on active duty, or you're a soldier who's temporarily on furlough or temporary assignment, subject to recall to active duty at any time. So you can't forget what you've learned about how to fight the battle. To understand the principles of spiritual warfare, but to not apply them to one's life, is accepting defeat without a battle. And a soldier, although he doesn't want to go to war, will go to war if that's what it takes to win. The result is that, and I have to go back to our Revolutionary War here in America. When the British were seeking to undermine the colonists' ability to defend and protect their rights by marching to Lexington on April 19th, 1775, Captain John Parker told the Minutemen militia, these were not professional soldiers. These were men who were willing to fight and had established themselves as an army. They were civilian soldiers. But they were willing to leave their farms and leave their businesses and fight for their freedom. And here's what Captain John Parker said: stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. And that's the position that Christians need to take. Because we don't want to start a battle. We don't want to start a war. We don't want to start something. But we have an assignment to proclaim freedom to the entire world. To declare freedom to those who are oppressed. To declare forgiveness to those who are bound by sin. And if we don't do that, then we have failed as soldiers of the cross. The result of that shot that was heard around the world in Lexington that day was a new nation where personal freedom and the liberties and rights that entails were supreme. Many fought, many died. But when it was all over, the British left, and the United States of America was born. There was something that happened at the cross of Calvary where Satan thought that he won. But in essence, he lost. Because what looked like Jesus losing the war was a battle strategy that Satan couldn't touch because Jesus became the sacrifice for sin for all of mankind. For whosoever will. And that sacrifice was paid in full. The price was paid in full for sin. And then to put a seal upon it that it was Almighty God who did it, on that Sunday morning, Jesus arose from the dead, taking power over death, hell, and the grave, and forever putting a seal of defeat on Satan. Satan continues to fight every Christian. He continues to fight every non-Christian. He continues to fight every man, woman, and child on planet Earth for all of time, because he still thinks that there's a possibility that he might be able to overthrow the throne of God. My answer to that is, how stupid can somebody be? That stupid. That's how stupid. Many people wanted what the American Revolution gave. However, few were willing to face the inevitable price that would be paid for that freedom. And still today, many seek freedom, but are unwilling to face the consequences and the cost of that freedom. Folks, let me just put it plainly. There's a price of freedom. And the price for our freedom has been paid by Jesus Christ. But we're going to have to collect that freedom by fighting against the forces of hell that seek to destroy mankind, by proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ and letting the chips fall where they may. This is the case with the church. The same as what I just said about many who wanted freedom but were not willing to pay the price. The world around the church is decaying into decadence. We see it just mushrooming every day. Sodom and Gomorrah thrown in our face. America is becoming a new Sodom and Gomorrah. Yet the church stands unready and unwilling to step into the line of fire and take back what has been stolen. And what's been stolen is our moral conscience. Rather than become bold proclaimers of the truth and examples of holiness, the church just continues to move to a more respectable neighborhood where chain link fences and security alarm systems are not necessary, all the while abandoning those who look to the church for sanity in their insane world. We're more knowledgeable today of spiritual and moral matters than ever before in the history of mankind. Yet we're less willing to fight the decaying of our societies because we're unwilling to accept the responsibility. With knowledge comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes a price. Those unwilling to pay the price for responsibility are the members of society whose worth in their own eyes is so low that they are worthless, or so great that the world cannot exist without them, thus making them legends in their own minds. Since Jesus has already died on the cross for the sins of all mankind, The Bible and world history tell us that these individuals need to get off of their crosses, and they need to get off their soapboxes, their pedestals, because no one's looking to them as Messiah. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, back in June of 1936, made this statement. There is a mysterious cycle in human events. To some generations, much is given. To other generations, much is expected. This generation of Americans has rendezvoused with destiny. And you know what? The same could be said of the church today. As a generation that has seen the proliferation of the gospel through means of communications and that our predecessors never imagined. I mean, I could not imagine even some of the things that we're able to do today. Sitting here in my office at 202 Ryan Road in Lafayette, Georgia, I'm able to teach and preach the gospel to the entire civilized world by way of the internet at a cost that's pennies compared to what just a few years ago would have been millions of dollars. We will be held to a greater accountability for our foolish waste and misuse of these resources. And I believe some of that judgment's coming down on America right now. Because during a period of massive prosperity, the church was more interested in building big cathedrals to men than what they were in reaching out with the gospel of Jesus Christ. They were more worried about building their own kingdoms. How many cars can I own? Ooh, the nicest, newest car, the biggest, most expensive house. The greatest vacations, the best foods. We deserve all the best because we are the king's kids. Living like a bunch of spoiled brats on the bounty of the Father's provision and work. And letting the business, the Father's business, as my mama used to say, go to hell in a handbasket. We've seen it in society when kids grew up with wealthy parents and the business, came time for them to take over the business, and they literally decimated the business by foolishly spending because they had no control over their own lives. And that's one of the things that this prosperity, not the prosperity message, because there's a truth to the prosperity message, but this period of extreme prosperity, that is what has destroyed so much of the church. Because it became more important. Look who I am. Than more important than look unto Jesus. I'll end this segment with this. Luke 12:48. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him will they ask the more. Plant seed where it will do the most good. And be a good husbandman, a good steward of the resources the Lord has given you. Why? Because the resources he puts in your hands are there for the propagation of the gospel, not so that you can live the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Until next time, this is Rick Tallent. Go with God, because he has already gone before you and prepared the way. He is your rear guard, and no matter what happens, he will always be right there by your side.